in terms of what I did there, we spent probably 80% of our time in the Government and Regulatory Affairs group furthering the idea that energy markets opened, that free market principles applied more broadly to energy markets resulted in consumer benefits that far exceeded regulated structures. And so what we were sort of the shock troops, in terms of fighting for freer energy markets, both in the U.S. And abroad, and we were very successful at doing that. I think we had very strong intellectual arguments that we brought to the table, and we also had very talented people within the group and within the company that helped to further that cause. So that was sort of what we did, and I was very fortunate to rise within the organization during the course of my 8 years there, ultimately heading up the the global organization. The story of Enron probably is a bit more complex than my story at Enron. Enron, as you may be aware, started off as a pretty boring asset-based company in the energy sector. Was the result of the merger of two pipeline companies, which is essentially a toll for passage type of business, not too exciting. But about the time 1985 when that merger happened, there was also a lot happening on the federal regulatory front in terms of opening up of gas markets in the U.S. to market forces. And the leadership of the company, I think Ken Lay in particular, saw the opportunities associated with that sort of went beyond the stodgy asset-based business that Enron had been in. And he brought in a lot of bright people that had commodities-based business. He brought in folks from organizations like McKinsey, both within the company and on a consulting basis, that helped, I think, the company begin to figure out how to penetrate particularly the wholesale gas business, which was really the first energy market to open up in a significant way. Great deal of success. Extended those principles, those gains, those opportunities to the electricity market as electricity markets began to open up in the early and mid-1990s. Again, great success. The Enron wholesale commodity business, even at the end, the day that the company entered bankruptcy, short from sort of a run on the bank liquidity issues, was still a very successful business. I think the more nuanced story that sometimes I think gets lost in the sensationalism of what people like Andy Fastow did is the fact that Enron decided it had these successes in the natural gas and electricity spaces, decided to try to extend them to other places. Whether it was broadband, whether it was retail electricity, which is a much different business than wholesale electricity, and I don't think brought a great deal of discipline, to the table on how it formed those businesses. I think applied, for example, accounting principles, particularly specifically mark-to-market accounting principles, to businesses where it didn't make sense. It had made sense in purely commodity, sort of futures-driven businesses like wholesale gas and electricity. It didn't make as much sense when applying it to asset-based businesses abroad, which Enron got into in a very significant way. It didn't make as much sense in the retail electricity context. And coupled with, I think, the misapplication of certain accounting principles, coupled with sometimes the compensation incentive structure that I think sometimes drove behaviors that were not in the long-term interest of the company, there began to, I think, be some issues that developed relative to some of these businesses, from a profitability perspective, from a cash flow perspective. And I think it was some of those missteps, the lack of discipline in forming and growing those businesses, that ultimately led to, I think, some of the symptoms that you and others have read a great deal about. I guess the antics of people like Andy Fastow, a lot of the special purpose instruments. I mean, I think that those behaviors emerged because the company had not been as disciplined as it should have been in the formation of some of its subsequent business endeavors. And obviously those mistakes, and then some of the I think the too cute by half special purpose vehicles that were created, all of that contributed to a loss of confidence in the company. And for a business that obviously whose lifeblood was access to capital, it ultimately, led to the bankruptcy, in December 2001. But, all of that said, particularly with the passage of time, I'm able to look back much more fondly, on my 8 years at Enron. Just an extraordinary set of people, an extraordinary set of challenges. I think that in many respects we were fighting on the right side of the issue, that free markets are not necessarily a panacea, and there is a role for an appropriate level of regulation. But I think we have continuously or consistently seen throughout history that humans prosper more when given freedom both politically and economically. So I think that the cause was the right one. The vehicle ended up being a somewhat flawed vehicle at the end of the day.